So this podcast, we wanted to do a wide range of topics on current events, the future, the Great Reset, the 19 event, stabbys, etc. So Elisha, since since the start of the start of the virus to now, what do you have any thoughts on all the different things that have happened? And
well, man, I gotta tell you, I remember it kind of like yesterday, where people were talking about, man, it's the 20s again. It's gonna be the roaring 20s. We're starting over. And not even 3 months in, we get like this huge kind of economic crash due to the 19 situation. And I always found it funny of like how roaring has this 20s going so far. So it's just been interesting seeing how, I think a lot of people had this momentum and this mindset that we were going to be setting this next decade up for something better. Something better as in technology, something better in transportation, something better in education, accessibility, resources. I think everyone was expecting something better, but it's been a really, really slow start.
Yeah. I think one thing I've seen, like with all the Great Reset stuff, which I don't know how much you've heard of that, is what it says to me is how planned everything is. Like essentially what they're rolling out is just ways in essentially all walks of life to get more control over everything. So from the economy to politics to technology, it all seems like what they are doing is trying to get more control. And so like for example with the vaccines, well, shouldn't have said that, but anyways, the stabbies, so they're starting to do rewriting, if I'm saying it correctly, RNA and DNA with vaccines. So what are your thoughts on that? Because I think if you start genetically modifying humans, you're getting into this area of the Brave New World, that book you might have heard of by Aldous Huxley. And at what point do you genetically modify humans so much that they're no longer human? What do you think about that?
Well, I think that when you try and mess with molecules and all these testings and everything, in a research lab, it's just a test. But in real life, it's real people with real problems, and I think that it's a very slippery slope that you try and play with. And if we're being honest, if we look at our present day situation, we could take just issues in the actual just meat market in general, modifying generations of just birds.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I didn't realize there are variations in chickens, and a lot of them were modified for certain research and issues to produce something that would be, for serving a certain kind of needs. So there's some chickens who are just, egg producing, and then there's some chickens that are literally just for the meat market. And this all started years and years ago, and it's interesting. I guess there was a major supplier that actually started their own farms because they wanted to be number one on reproducing of chickens for the meat industry, and they've always been able to maintain that quality and also price point at their stores because of it. And I'm not saying it's a direct correlation to human DNA and modifications, but I think if you look at the consequences of playing with DNA, it might surprise you how once you get to a certain point, you can't go back. You know, you can't reestablish, you know, a base point because you've mixed and changed things up. But, you know, I'm not, you know, heavily an expert in this category of field, but what I will say is that cautious consideration should be there because, you know, if there's always going to be a remedy to fix something specific, the side effects are still going to be there, you know. And so I think there's a lot of people who, you know, they have faith in the community of science and also, you know, our medical professionals, which I don't, you know, give them any flack for that. But I also think that, you know, without accountability, without proper accountability and without, you know, proper oversight, you know, things can get out of hand. You know, people have agendas and that can get complicated.
Yeah. To me, I'd be interested to see what you think. Doing essentially these things that are going into people's bodies that are rewriting their RNA is a pretty radical step, and I think the control over that is a lot of power, and I don't think a lot of people realize that. I mean, I'm sure that there's definitely a lot of people that do, but I feel like there's a lot of people that don't. They just blindly trust the, quote, science, even though it's not like all scientists agree on everything. Science is seen as this kind of God that everybody agrees, which isn't true.
Yeah, that is very true. I think there is actually diversity in the science and science community. What I will say is that I think you have a good point on the talk about, you know, it kind of being radical because you're pushing the limits on this kind of element of control and how much can you configure something to be something that into being perfect. I honestly think that when we stop and look at our life right now, we have this blessing of being able to take preventative measures on healthcare, you know, whether it's preventative care or preventative maintenance. But if you also look, it's very costly. Sometimes it's not always as effective. You know, there's still no 100% guarantee that it's going to solve everything. What it does is, they say, is it eradicates certain issues. But I often wonder if that's the case, then why do we end up with these settlement deals years later? You know, where you're entitled to compensation because the side effects weren't completely known at the time. And about this upcoming resolution of this issue of the 19 situation, what they don't want you to really think about or consider is the fact that there's a lot of immunity on, you know, not enough testing, not enough time frame to effectively say this is the best case scenario. This is the best case scenario for now, but it's not. Is it the best case scenario for the future? When you think about anything that's going to affect anything on a mass level, mass scale, you have to understand that temporary fixes may help in the front end, but on the back end can hurt, you know, not only your efforts but also many other people who are affected by it.
Essentially what they're doing is they're trying to genetically engineer humanity, and that is extremely radical. And I think what we're also seeing is they're also going to try to restrict everybody who doesn't get vaccinated. And I mean, I don't know how it's all going to take shape, and it'll probably be different depending on countries, but I think they're probably going to try to make it so that you have to be vaccinated, proof of vaccination to get a passport and to go into large like concert halls, stadiums, that kind of thing. And I'm trying to think if there would be any other. I'm sure there might be some other things with it, but so they're essentially restricting everyone who doesn't get this. So essentially, it's trying to genetically engineer everyone for at least a lot of these vaccines, and then punishing the people who don't. And once you start looking into what a lot of the elites believe in, like eugenics, so eugenics got a bad name because of World War II and the Nazis, but from what I've seen, and some people I think who, I know James Corbett has definitely done work on this. I think Jay Dyer has also done work on this, and Richard Grove, I think, as well, as long as other people. But those are 3 really good people on this kind of stuff. So eugenics, selective breeding, that kind of things, essentially they went underground, and a lot of the elite still believes in this stuff. You look at Bill Gates, his dad was like CEO or president of Planned Parenthood, something like that. So there's a lot of stuff that you can find out about that, and it ties to everything that's going on now.
Yeah, I think when you talk about how there's going to be this huge push for those who don't get the preventative care measure to help eradicate this issue, I think that's a good notation to make, that there is going to be a huge push. And I think we should talk about the mindset behind it. So the mindset behind this is that people who are skeptical or maybe even lazy or don't know, they're not going to do it because unless you make them do it, like this is kind of like we have to force people to do good, which I don't think that's always the case. But I also don't think this is anything new to some degree, to enforce restrictions on like travel restrictions and things like that. There are various locations in the world where it's actually kind of highly recommended, almost required, especially if you go on a team or whatever, to get certain kind of treatments or preventative care for illnesses that are very prevalent there in that region. I've been out of the country a couple of times, and my very first trip, there was like 2 vaccines that I had to have just for preventative care, and it was recommended. And so the good news was the measures for those lasted longer than, just a couple of years, so that was nice. But at the same time, it's one of those situations where it's like, well, if everyone in that region would have been addressed for it and they did what we do, trying to eradicate it, would I even need to have that too? So it's a double-edged sword in some cases, but I often wonder if the true driver behind what they're doing is actually, holds some form of integrity, or if they ever ask any questions of ethics or morals behind it, and I often wonder if that's put on the back burner, because when people are under pressure, things can get very chaotic at times, and so a chaotic situation isn't really the hard thing. It's when it's just being in chaos, and this situation of the 19 is a living chaos. If we look at the headlines in our news, you'll notice that this discussion of the new normal, is a huge thing, and I often wonder if that's what they're saying is we just need to prepare ourselves for the new normal, or can we get back to some form of sense of normalcy? No one's ever really spoken about it lately, but I do remember that being a hot topic for a while. Is the new normal is you're going to have to spread yourselves apart and be social distance and all this other stuff. And it's funny because you're in America when your neighbors all have picketed fence next door to each other, and we're already kind of like, well, we're Americans, but we all have our property and our peace and everything, and so it's fitting the bill a little bit that we have to social distance each other because we're already doing it in a way. So, just observations.
I think another thing is, and this is not meant to be negative, but I don't think things are going to go back the way they were before this happened. And I'm not saying that positive things might not happen. I'm saying there might be less people wearing masks. There might be, you know what I mean? Like things might go down and get better, but they're not going to go. It's not going to completely go back the way it was.
No. Yeah, I think you got a point. So I actually think this is going to give people more of a reason to be high alert. Like, if you have some sense of illness, people are going to play a card of extra cautiousness, and they're going to probably ostracize you in a way. Where it's like, oh, no, don't even, because we already know that these kind of things are going to be on our way. But it's funny because the issue at hand is nowhere near the severe level of something like SARS, which is beyond harsher and more detrimental, lethal in a way. The problem with this is the fact that it's kind of like a light duty load, and it affects more people instead of just a small percentage of people. So I actually think you've got a point in saying that we may not ever get back to the new normal. The new normal, I mean the old normal. The new normal might be a blend.
Yeah, and so if you start doing research on viruses, you find that this is the publicly known thing, is like the ability to engineer viruses has been around since the 70s, and who knows, that's publicly known, like, right? So who knows what they were capable of privately, and they weren't telling people.
Yeah.
So
I mean, I know that they're probably pretty fairly aware that there are challenges that they face, because knowing it all and to the extent of like what the effectiveness of some of this stuff is probably deep and wide. Like the effects are rampant, and so you're trying to get it under control, and that's hard.
And so essentially what they can do now is all they have to do to control things is they can just release another virus, and they have the ability to engineer them, they have the ability to release them, and they can just say they can give out whatever story. I mean, the massive lies about the amount of death and the danger. I mean, if the media had treated this differently, we would barely know that this was going on. Like, it would be like a news story, a secondary news story.
Yeah, it would have only been ran for a couple weeks. I think, if it wasn't driven by other factors, you have a good point. Even in the past, let's just say quarterly, they talk about seasonal, things that come up, that you can go get treated, or, special cases from here or there. But no, this was ran for many, many weeks. And so, the driving factor is who's influencing the hot topics of current events. And I think you got a point that, these larger organizations are subjected to an agenda.
And it seems that like there's essentially two different groups of people: the people who are able to think for themselves, and the people who just blindly follow what they're told. And it's not that like these two groups, like there's diversity within these two groups, but the people who just blindly trust the media and the approved doctors and those kind of things, it really goes to show the ability of the things like public schools and the mass media to control people.
Yeah, I could see in some ways where that can be very plausible. One of the big things I think that is a huge factor in a lot of this, where you would blindly trust someone, is the fact that your plate is full and it's already getting and it's already full of daily responsibilities, trying to maintain your social status or life or whatever social groups you already have. And then on top of that, you know, you're trying to pursue something that's going to better yourself and things like that. You know, we've got all these catchphrases that are out there, you know, make yourself better, you can do anything, dream big, and trying to work on these things. They're big, and it takes a lot of time to see a reality. Sometimes it is easier to just blindly follow. But the thing is you get some sort of compromise in the end where it's a 50-50 shot of whether you're making the right decision or not. And we know that if you don't do your homework, if you just blindly follow, you suffer the consequences later. There's always going to be a consequence. And the consequence in this sense is that if you don't do the research, you might end up like some of these people in the past who have found out later that it wasn't the best case scenario for your health, for your family, for your social status. You know, you may reap the consequences of some sort of whatever, you know, some lack of preventative measures in some cases. And I'm just curious on whether people are really eager to just get back to being able to socialize with people and be around family, you know, without that barrier, or is it, you know, they're just too busy?
Well, and I think the disturbing thing that we've seen is pretty much there's definitely been some pushback, and it hasn't been reported in terms of protests and riots and stuff like that. More so maybe in other countries where it's been more of a hard lockdown kind of thing, but a lot of people have just gone along with it, I think, probably because they're so bought into believing what they're told, but also I think they're so into their technology that it doesn't really affect them because they can still use their technology at home. And also they're so apathetic and just kind of maybe even dead inside that they're not really even willing to fight back. Also, I think there's a lot of fear of death, and I think that comes from this post-Christian society where they don't really, either death is just, you know, that's it, or they don't know what's going to happen. They're fearful of it. And I wonder if it's almost as if they realize that after death is going to be a continuation of the negative, of where their life is now being, you know, this negative state, and it's just going to be a continuation of that in the next life, you know, and almost as if they subconsciously realize that, you know, without not having Christ and things like that. I don't know. What do you think?
Look, I think we know that there are quite a few people, diverse people groups out there that look at this from a different angle. You got the doomsday preppers, you know, the people who've always been around, been preparing for like crazy. And then you've got some of these individuals who are just kind of like, okay, well, I need to make sure that I'm okay and the people I'm with are okay. But then you've got that small little crowd who are like, well, maybe we should question everything, you know? And so that's where those protesters come in. And they're like, okay, look, for some reason, you're trying to overly justify the means or rules or whatever your power to get more control. And I think that's what we've seen is that there has been several groups that have put you know, their authority in question. And I don't know if it's a means of accountability or if it's just they've had enough, they're at the end of their ropes. I don't know. But what I do know is this, that we would rather them ask those hard questions now than wait to see the side effects of the questions that haven't been asked. And I have respect for both sides of the party. Those who want to just say, okay, let's get this done and over with, get us in the clear, great. You know, you guys have all your checklists good and go. But then for those people who are like, well, hold on, let's make sure we're not having to backtrack. Let's do this a little bit more efficiently. I have some respect for those kind of people. I don't think they genuinely are looking to cause conflict or to cause controversy. I think they're generally saying, make sure that whatever you're going to do is really going to be effective. It's going to really be whatever you're going to say, 99.9% effective. And if it's not, then maybe we should go back to the drawing board, maybe put us on the waiting list a little bit longer so we have something that's effective, that's going to help the greater good of humanity. Is that something hard to ask for?
And you've seen things like protesters being arrested, people being arrested for broadcasting videos, and this is around the world. And you're seeing these extreme things that in normal times people would be, I think, very disturbed by. I mean, there's still people that are disturbed by it, but I think it goes to show that, and I've known this for a long time, if you can make people afraid, you can really control them a lot.
Yeah, so fear is one of those factors that we know can either be a propeller or it can be a hindrance. And what I mean by that is that it can propel us to actually do something to resolve the issue, or it can be a hindrance to our day-to-day life, and it's in the sense of the fact that we end up just following whatever guide is going to just help us get us out of the situation. We just want it to be over with. We'll shut down and shut off and just whoever's going to help us, save us, do that kind of situation. And I think the driving factor in some of these discussions of fear and control is, is there abuse in the system? Is there abuse in authority? Is there abuse in these areas where those who are the professionals or experts, are they genuinely and honestly giving us the data and supplying us with enough resources so that we can better help the greater good? I mean, a lot of them, when they took their positions of being the person who's the expert, being the person who, has done their research, they have been supposedly vetted in many different ways, whether it's, they've gone and seek out higher education, they've been able to effectively defend their position on whatever they've studied. And so we want to say we believe them and we believe their hard work has paid off, but we know that those who are in leadership above them may or may not have that same level of integrity that these people are walking through, walking under. Mm-hmm. Because at the end of the day, well, who's running the show? And if these people aren't put in place and measures of accountability, you're going to often wonder, well, are they just being told that they need to say these things?
Another thing to keep in mind is I think that's one of the big differences, I think, if you've ever heard the term red-pilled or blue-pilled. I don't know if you've heard those terms, but...
Wasn't that in like a movie or something?
It was in The Matrix.
Yeah.
So, and I think one of the... Essentially, blue-pilled is, in very simple terms, it's just kind of the normal way of thinking, like the kind of the unenlightened, unawakened type of thinking. Red pill is like seeing the real reality. And I think one of the big differences between the blue pill and red pill in terms of people's thinking is thinking that the people in positions of authority and power have your best interests at heart. And if you look at it from a Christian perspective, people being fallen, the tendency is going to be they're not going to have your best interest at heart, especially when we're in a society that's post-Christian. They don't. So for one thing, a lot of them don't have Christian morality to guide them, and due to the Enlightenment era politics of instead of having monarchy, you have these democracies and republics. The whole system is messed up to the point where the true people in power, who are the banking families and those kind of things behind the scenes, people don't even know who those people are, and they don't know who they are, so they can't keep them accountable, and they think the politicians are the ones who are truly in power, when really the politicians are employees. Whereas with monarchy, it was the people in power were actually the ones who the people perceived to be in power, and they could keep them in check, at least to a better extent. So these are all these factors that are playing into it.
So, not to go on a huge tangent, but my point about where people are asking questions, and sometimes the apparent timing can seem off, oftentimes I think they are misunderstood by those in authority. Oftentimes I think people are thinking that it can be a form of disrespect, or they're just trying to challenge their authority. But sometimes people asking those questions are really just trying to affirm what they either know or don't know. I mean, if I'm in the middle of a speech, talking to a big group, and someone's considered being a heckler because they, are talking and things like that, they're yelling and they have an opposing viewpoint, most people are like, get that dude out of here, get him out of here because, he's causing a ruckus. But that same guy might actually had a valid point. It just may not have been the apparent timing. And we've seen this across the board, whether it's politics, whether it's, our systematics in school systems or whatever. I mean, we've seen that guy. We've all experienced that guy or girl or whoever, however we're talking, that person who has, they're trying to make sure that their point is being heard. And that is the beauty of being we the people. We know that there's going to be some people who have a few more questions, have a few more, differing of opinions. And so, therefore, we should take that in consideration, that these protests and moments of conflict aren't always a negative. And I think that's something to keep in consideration, especially for those in leadership, is like, what if those people are asking the questions you need to succeed?
Sure.
Appropriately.
And another thing that I think we're going to see around the world is the social credit system, which they have in China, and it's essentially going to be, you're going to get added or subtracted points depending on how you're acting. And it's a very authoritarian system, and it could be things like, you're part of a political movement or party that we don't like, you are getting subtracted points. You are, you don't have your stabby, well, you guys know what I'm talking about, but you don't have that. You don't have X, Y, or Z. So it's essentially, it's a way, in a behavioralist sense, to use the carrot and the stick, pluses and minuses, to control people. And I think that's one of the problems with this, is I think due to people being unfair, they're going to be essentially accepting to the enslaving of people. And I mean, it could be the point of, saying like your social credit score is not high enough, you can't get on a plane, you can't get on public transportation, maybe you can't get a bank account, maybe you're denied from having loans, this kind of thing. Maybe you can't get government benefits. I mean, there's all sorts of things, and you can study the Chinese social credit score to see how this would work.
It's an interesting way to judge people's merit on the way of life, I guess. I don't know if it's ethical or moral. I don't know if that, should be a benefactor in whether someone should succeed or grow. I think we should definitely consider the fact that if you're taking another part of someone else's life that's irrelative, not even relative to a system, and trying to apply that to their social structure of life, I would see that's very questionable. And I see that as alarming, because essentially that is causing a form of systematic suppression to a certain group of people. And I don't think that's the only form in that social group or network of government that's being seen or done to people. I think they even do that in the educational system there. But I'm not the best guy to address this issue, but I definitely see some things in question.
Another thing I think they're going to do, so I'm pretty sure that they're going to have a universal basic income. And I think what they're going to do is they're going to make it so you have to have a good social credit score to get the money. And so if you haven't got your injection, you're going to have a bad social credit score. You're not going to get the money. So it's this way to control people. There might also be some form of universal healthcare as well. So I mean these systems, and Brittany Webb has done some research on, or at least she's talked about it. I mean, some people in the U.S. say we need to become, I think it was something like, as authoritarian or more authoritarian than China to compete with them, which is pretty disturbing. And then you start talking about artificial intelligence. You have any thoughts on that, on artificial intelligence?
It's kind of a new category for me. I mean, I think the idea or the agenda that people have behind it is probably intending to help the greater good of people, of different people groups. But at the same time, the question is how much progress is that going to help, in the long run? Because if we can't even educate the people who are supposedly going to be helping build these systems or sense of technology, if there's not going to be enough people learning and growing in an educational sense, you're essentially just going to have more people in a desperate situation.
Right. So
there's going to be a huge imbalance on economic structure.
So that's one thing I've kind of
sorry, not to interrupt, but I think this is going to definitely affect trade,
sure,
the trade industry widely in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I think it's going to affect everything. I think one of the things the conclusion I've pretty much come to now is if we have artificial intelligence, it's going to get to the point where it's going to be better at doing, maybe almost anything better than humans, and it's going to cause massive unemployment. And in the past, there would be new industries created that people could get jobs in. But the problem is, if artificial intelligence is so good, those new sectors or systems will be dominated by artificial intelligence as well, which I think, I'll let Elisha comment.
So one thing you brought up was this perception that it's going to be good. Like, I think the angle of what good is going to be very subjective, because even though AI may be good, the justification process behind that may not always be effective. Because let's just put it this way: so you may be able to get, higher productivity, less room for error. The margins of error are less, but the price tag is going to be huge. But you're thinking over time it'll justify it because it'll be cheaper that way. But I honestly think genuinely you cannot have a strong core of an economic system without adaptability. If it cannot adapt to the economic structure at hand, it's going to be expensive to make those adjustments with AI.
Mm-hmm.
People are going to be like, oh, well, no, it's not, and everything. We got these, companies and tech support that can make the adjustments and everything. But just think, if you're buying a flat rate product, or whatever it is in AI, and then something in the market changes, it's going to cost you a pretty penny to adjust that whole structure because you bought it as a final product. I mean, it is proposed that it will be good for certain industries, because they may not change or fluctuate. But the adaptability factor that like humans can learn and adapt a little bit more swifter, that's what's going to be in question.
Right now.
Because you have to program everything.
Yeah.
And they say they're self-learning, but even then, there's still room for fallibility.
Mm-hmm. I think that one thing to keep in mind is I think in the going into the future, I think there's going to be a point where the AI is going to be... It's going to be more intelligent than humans and more capable. And
capable, yes. I can definitely see that. Like the margin of error, because everything in AI is calculated. Mm-hmm. It is highly calculated. It is highly engineered by these individuals who do test after test after test.
Yeah.
I'll just give you an idea. So we know that the transportation industry has a high demand for employment right now. It's probably one of the highest demanding areas of employment, especially over the road for trucking. Mm-hmm. Now, there have been several leading industries, businesses that are working on the AI industry for self-driving.
Yeah,
we even know one of the highest producing. I forgot what they call that service, but Uber has been working on projects where it's self-driving cars. And they're even working on that level at the commercial level, and so we know within the next 10 years or so, there could be a real shift change on self-driving vehicles. Mm-hmm. So we know that, but here's the thing: the adaptability of that is gonna still, like I'm saying, even though it may be capable, it may be even better to some extent because the margins, because they're looking at the probability and statistics a lot behind this stuff.
Yeah.
The adaptability feature, I don't know, is always going to be there. Because eventually, this high price piece of thing is only high priced and valued until it becomes a piece of junk.
Yeah.
Because there's always going to be something better. Because we have, if you look at our car industry, your cars are supposed to keep going and going and going and getting better and better and better. But some of them have actually just been reinvented and re-engineered.
Mm-hmm. My point being, and this is not necessarily tomorrow, but the AI is going to continue to become more sophisticated, more intelligent, more adaptable over time. And I don't think there's going to be... I mean, you bring in things like quantum computing, Moore's law, and the ever increasing improvement of technology. I think I get what you're saying in the more present term. I mean, that makes sense. I mean, there's still
yeah,
but
yeah, I can see what you're saying
because
I'm just curious on what it looks like. I mean, there are highly brilliant individuals out there who have the ability and capabilities to engineer stuff that will be self-learning, self-sufficient, and outperform human capabilities to various degrees. But what I think will never happen, and I'm very cautious on this, and empathetic features will be very hard to adapt into or integrate into AI.
I get what you're saying, but I think they've done tests recently. There's a certain robotic test. I think is it the Turing test? I think maybe.
I think you're in the right area.
And they've gotten. I don't know if they passed the Turing test or they've gotten close or whatever, but the AI has gotten to that point of being kind of a artificial intelligence test. And I think one of the things is, Elisha, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this. If AI keeps on increasing, A, could it reach the point where people could start treating it like a god? And B, would it be something where it could be something possessed by, demonic possession, satanic possession? I know this is getting kind of out there for some people who aren't used to talking about this stuff, but what do you think?
I think there's always room for idols. I mean, I think there's always room for making anything, prominently take up occupy a lot of space in your life. So I would never rule out that is not a plausible case. Especially since humans very routinely and we very often look for stuff to fill in gaps in our life, and the reasoning behind a lot of this is because something either isn't good enough or something we get bored with or something. It's just there's something insufficient. So for someone to resolve that this is going to be a better solution for whatever their problem is, I could see it happening. Very much so. Now, whether they realize that and recognize it for what it is, that's a whole different discussion.
So you'd say possibly yes for both.
Yeah. Now, I was on the AI sense of things, and I don't think this is like true AI, but I mean, for the empathetic features, there actually is not permitting this, but there's actually an app for babies, for helping parents figure out what their baby's crying about. Mm-hmm. I saw that recently somewhere, and I thought that was kind of interesting. And so, I'm not saying that that's going to be, the end-all, be-all like that it's not helpful, but I don't know if it's going to be truly accurate all the time. That's what I'm questioning in AI,
Well, sure, yeah. I mean, I don't think it's not going to be actually, like, it's not going to be on par of who we believe God is, you know what I mean? But
But I get what you're saying.
The question is there a point where technology goes too far? Because I think, my belief, AI is more of a threat than nuclear weapons, much more of a threat. And I think all the different things that are going to happen in the near future, a lot of people just do not realize.
To begin to answer this question, you kind of have to answer the question of how much of your life is just relative. Mm-hmm. Like, how much can it be subjected to just relative reasoning, relative, like, in the now? That's where I think begins to answer that question, because where you land on it kind of depends on how far is too far. If you're open to anything, then you would say that it can't get any worse than it has been already. But for people who set boundaries and actually take back and look at life a little bit from a little more drier side of things, I think they would say anything beyond the scope of just what's natural is probably too far. Because let's just take the argument on organic versus artificial material. Mm-hmm. In our food industry. Mm-hmm. Many would say that artificial foods and things like that are really good. It helps the markets. It builds our system and everything, and we've made a lot of money, and it's cheaper. It lasts longer. But then many would say that it actually has caused a lot of other health issues, and has actually has hurt our care, our health, our actual health, and they're finding that later down the line that because we have so much consumption of it, we have issues in various ways. There's a number of things. So there are some people out there who would say, like, if you go whole foods and things like that, you don't have those issues that you would normally run into by consuming a lot of our artificial things. Mm-hmm. So how far is too far? Well, I think you got to start with that question of what's relative. Because there's a lot out there that, do I think it's going to kill you whether you eat artificial food or human or whole food? I don't think so. But do I think there's a cost to benefit analysis that you should do for yourself? Yes, I think you should know for yourself what's actually helping you and what's actually hindering you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one line, this is not something I've thought a ton about, is it replacing something that's broken, or are you trying to go beyond your own body to something that's to make it better and radically changing your own body? For example, if you're missing a leg and you're getting a robotic leg, I don't think there's much problem with that. But if you're cutting off your leg and then putting on a robotic leg, I think that's a lot more.
It's pretty drastic in some cases.
Problematic.
Yeah. I mean, so let's take that analogy and break one piece down. The first example that you gave reasonably I think most people would reason that the welfare of that person's life and health is directly affected by their ability to take care of themselves for self-care. Mm. Being able to be active, being able to function, and be able to be independent, that affects their independence. You know, they have to be dependent on someone else to a degree to accommodate some of those issues. So therefore, if they get an aesthetic pleasing leg or something, or robotic leg, that is a resolution to them being able to work, breathe, and freely be able to enjoy the liberties of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Mm-hmm. Versus the other one, you have a perfectly fine leg.
Yeah,
you can do what you need to do and operate without having to have a ton of assistance. And yet you're saying, in a way, it can be perceived that you're saying that it's illegitimate and so you need something better. Mm-hmm. Well, someone on the opposite spectrum would be like, I would love to have that leg. Why? What do you mean it's illegitimate?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think this is one of the big divides. I think ultimately you can boil it down to the question of whether or not you think you can become God, and the insanity of thinking that you can. Because I think for a lot of people, technology is this way to become God. And, you know, I was listening to these college courses from the great courses. It was I think it was a history of the world or something like that. And at the end, the professor gave this speech that I think a lot of people would just say is satanic. I mean, he was essentially saying, you know, humanity is going to become greater than God. And it was absolutely insane, the stuff he was saying at the end. And this is like very mainstream college course that, you know, it's a very mainstream company. You know, I got it from the library. And, you know, I think people are going to start doing things like cutting off their limbs and getting robotic limbs and genetically modifying themselves. I mean, this is what you see in the cyberpunk genre. You see it in video games like Deus Ex series and the Cyberpunk 2077 series, and you know, movies like Blade Runner. And I think it seems that this cyberpunk genre was a form of predictive programming to get people normalized to it, so that they can, you know, be more okay with it when it actually comes around. Go ahead, you're good.
Yeah, so I guess the biggest thing that I've been sitting here processing this whole discussion is this understanding that there are going to be some people out there. And when I say some people, I mean a lot of people in some ways. Because in a way we're kind of conditioned to want the next new thing. We're driven by this shiny object kind of effect. And so there are going to be some people who are going to be like, you know, they say it's better. It's better for me. This is something new. Let's try it. So I'm not surprised that there are many people who might be somewhat conditioned to say, well, that's the next new thing. I want to stay up with the times and try it. That's why I'm not surprised by that. Mm-hmm. What I would be surprised by is by someone saying that I'm not enough. You know, I don't have enough, because they have a ton of stuff. They've been so caught up into a ton of tangible things that they don't have enough stuff. Mm-hmm. And so that would be a little surprising because oftentimes, you know, at least in our Western society, you know, we end up with a lot of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they're processing a lot of new things, new gadgets, tech stuff all the time. And so, you know, there's going to be a variation on interpretation on and appreciation for technology. So I'm not surprised in some cases about that professor's perspective. That may very well be perceived as radical. Mm-hmm. But, you know, I'm curious to see what the reasonings are behind what people have to say about if tomorrow, you know, they were running a new line for new features of your body that you could get, you know, cut off the old and put on something new. Why would people buy into that? So that's my opening thought. I'm not going to draw any conclusions, but yeah, I definitely think that's something, you know, that's a big open for discussion. So. Yeah,
and I think one thing I would say I think we might both agree on is, you know, ultimately material things are never going to be enough.
Oh, dude, keep this in mind. I know many people are probably chiming in and listening, but everything on this planet has an expiration date. It burns out. It gets old. You know, even the news that sometimes we get can be relatively old. It's new to us, but it can get pretty old pretty quick. So I'm not surprised by any means that things will expire.
Yeah. So I think what we're gonna do now, we're gonna wind down this episode, and we've decided that this is just gonna be part one of our talks on the Great Reset, and this is going to be continuing for, I don't know, you know, we'll see how it goes, but we need at least one more episode to talk about everything, maybe more. So thank you for listening, and look for part 2.